There's been a lot of topics here. Right. So if you confess that you've done wrong, then everything will get better. I think we all know from experience that a lot of times we confess we make things right and things don't actually get better. We sometimes have to deal continuously with the consequences of our actions. Anything else jump out to you guys? What else did we talk about? Give me a couple more. You guys remember anything at all? Okay. Well, let's dive in. We're going to be in chapter 32 to start. So if you want to open your Bibles, you can. Especially you guys over here, probably going to need to open your Bibles to follow along. So Job chapter 32, and let's talk a little bit about Elihu. So we're going to start in verse 1 of chapter 32. So Bibles, pagers, cell phones, whatever you got, open up to Job 32. And in verse 1 it says, "So these three men," that is Job's other friends, Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, they ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, he burned with anger." So, what are some things about Elihu that jump out to you immediately from that passage? What are some things that characterize him? He's very angry, yes. He burns with anger. He's consumed with anger. What else? He's not happy with Job's friends, yes. What else? He's younger, okay. So, there are a number of different commentators who disagree about the nature of Elihu. Some of them say that he's actually a later addition to the book, as in he didn't actually exist in the earliest text, and somebody, in order to give the book a little bit more of a moral lesson, inserted him. However, there's enough evidence for the argument that he was there, the whole time, that it kind of, you could go one way or the other with it. But I think it's most biblically accurate to agree that he was there the whole time. The reason why he wasn't mentioned is because, as Grant said, somebody said that he was young. So you, Ryan, sorry. You guys are like best friends anyway, so I guess you can be interchangeable or something. So he's the youngest, so he's not mentioned when he comes in. He's not really of noble background. He's young and doesn't have not a huge reputation like the other men do. So he waited his turn to speak. When he was unsatisfied with their answers to Job, he decides to open his mouth. So he's going to take 6 whole chapters back to back, chapters 32 through 37, to speak his mind. And while a lot of his accusations against Job and the other three friends drip with anger, he's actually the one speaker throughout the book of Job that God is not going to rebuke for what he says. So when God shows up in the next couple chapters and answers Job, he's going to have some things to say to Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar. But for Elihu, he's not going to say anything critical. And for Job, of course, God's going to rebuke Job as well. Also, Elihu overall is much more sensitive to Job's plight than the other three friends. Though he's angered, he's not irrational, disrespectful, or rude in the way he speaks. Unlike, you remember, I think it was Zophar, it was Bildad, he says to Job, this is bad, but you deserve worse, and all this kind of stuff. Like, he's just very harsh with Job. And so Elihu is not that way. He's very respectful, though he is angry. And I think, he also says that he desires to justify Job in chapter 33. And he also invites him to speak. Like he says to Job, if I'm wrong in what I'm saying, then answer me and let's talk about this. So he's very respectful in his approach. And then finally, his argument is also different from his other friends because while they claim that Job was suffering because he had sinned, Elihu argues that Job is sinning by his pride because of his suffering. Do you see the difference there? So the friends were saying that Job was suffering because he had sinned. Sin causes suffering. Elihu is arguing that Job is sinning because he's suffering. Suffering causes sin in this instance to Elihu. So that's where we are. So let's dive into Elihu's speech. Slide number 1 here. He's going to rebuke Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and then he's going to rebuke Job. So number one over here. His first rebuke to Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad is that they failed to correct Job's misunderstanding. So you guys over here, we're going to look at chapter 32, verses 11 and 12. And you guys over here, I've got the slide up here. So here we go. Elihu says, "Behold, I waited for your words. I listened for your wise sayings while you searched out what to say. I gave you my attention, and behold, there was none among you who refuted Job or who answered his words." They didn't correct Job's misunderstanding. They offered all kinds of advice. They said a whole bunch of things. Like there's all these chapters and chapters of them speaking up until now, and then they haven't offered any type of correction for his misunderstanding. Not only that, but number 2, go to the next one, they failed to give Job good advice. So even in all of their speech, not only did they fail to change his perspective on what God was doing, they also didn't even give him anything practical to go by. So they just said a whole lot of philosophical stuff. We just lose this completely. And didn't actually offer him any advice. So go to the next one there. This is from chapter 32, verse 7 for you guys over there. Elihu says, "Let day speak, and many years teach wisdom. I gave you my attention, and behold, there was none among you who refuted Job or who answered his words." And he says, "They are dismayed, and they answer him more. They have not a word to say." They are completely baffled at how to give Job any type of advice that he's gonna be able to use to get out of this situation. And yet, at the same time as they offer him nothing, they condemn him for the attitude that he takes. So they're completely unhelpful, and Elihu recognizes this immediately. So that's his rebuke to the 3 friends. They're done and over with pretty quickly. He doesn't have a whole lot to say to them, just that they were unhelpful. So next slide. Now we're gonna get into Job's problem, and here's the big crux of his argument. So look with me at chapter 33, verses 9 through 11. Job was righteous in his own eyes. So jump down to 33, verses 9 through 11.
Justin, can you use a mic, any mic?
I can.
Is that all right?
Which one was cutting out at you, the yellow one or the pink one?
I'm not
This
sure.
is pretty good, actually. Except I gotta hold something now. No. I'm just gonna pull this cord. Alright, let's try that again. Turn to chapter 33, verses 9 through 11, where it says, Elihu speaking to Job, "You say, I am pure without transgression, am clean and there is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasion against me, that is, God finds a fault with me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths." Do you hear the sense of that Job is saying, this is unfair the way that God is treating me? He puts my feet in stocks. You guys know what stocks are? You ever been to Cape May's got one of them sitting out there, like some of Williamsburg, they've got stocks sitting out there. What are they? What are stocks? Not like chicken stock. Yeah, it's like they got a hole for your head, like a slightly bigger hole for your head, and then a slightly smaller set of holes for your hands. And it locked you in there, and you had to sit there out in the sun and the rain, and birds would do their business on you and stuff like that. So he's saying that God is unfairly punishing me. He's put me in this cool type of punishment, and he is keeping watch over all my paths. It's like God is spying on me. He's trying to catch me in a fault. So he's speaking against God's righteousness. He's saying that I'm righteous. I've done nothing wrong, which we've covered this a couple of times now. Job has said this repeatedly. So Elihu is now addressing that problem, unlike the other friends. So though he had not sinned to cause his own misery, that is Job, he presumed himself to be the victim of injustice. If you can go to the next slide there, one more, that was the passage. God reveals hidden sin is what I want to get at here. I'm sorry you guys can't see the passage over there. If you want to turn to 1 Corinthians 4, 1 through 5, that's where this passage is. But God reveals hidden sin. So though Job is insisting that he's innocent, God is aware of what's in our hearts. So the passage says, For I am not aware of anything against myself. This is Paul speaking, but I am not thereby acquitted. In other words, just because I don't think I've done any wrong doesn't necessarily mean that I'm innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in the darkness, and will disclose the purposes of the heart. So God will reveal hidden sin. Though Job has done, as we've established, throughout this whole study, that Job was the most righteous man who ever lived. He'd done nothing to deserve the suffering that he was going through. In the process of this, he's become very bitter. He's become very angry and prideful. So he's got sin in his heart, though he doesn't admit that. Though he might not be doing it consciously, he's covering his own fault. So let's say there was a guy who was out late and hanging out with some of the wrong people, and he had a little too much, Kool-Aid to drink. We'll call it Kool-Aid. So he comes home. He stumbles in the door. It's all dark. He comes up. He got into like a fight with some guy. He's all beaten up and stuff. He goes upstairs to the bathroom. He looks at himself in the mirror, and he's just all bloody, but he's kind of like in a daze because he drank too much Kool-Aid. So he's looking at himself, and he decides he can cover this up. His wife will never know. He puts all the Band-Aids on, cleans himself up, and all this stuff. So he, pleased with himself, doctors himself all up, and goes to bed. Well, in the morning, his wife, gets out of bed. He's kind of just lying there, pretending he's asleep, and she comes back in, and she goes, "You were drunk last night. You drunk on the Kool-Aid, and you got into a fight last night, didn't you?" And he's like, "No. Why would you think that?" And, through the days that he's still in. And she goes, "Well, somebody had to put all the Band-Aids all over the mirror." We think that we're covering up our offenses, but God reveals the hidden sins of our hearts. Is the point. So, furthermore, Proverbs 6 and 1 Corinthians 10 talk about how pride goes before a fall, and the one who thinks he stands should be cautious lest he fall. So though Job is insistent that he's righteous, which is the main thing that Elihu is targeting, he is not righteous before God because he has hidden sin in his heart. So that's the first thing that Elihu says to Job. Next slide. Job is righteous in his own eyes. Second rebuke. Job justified himself rather than God. He justified himself rather than God. Turn with me. I've got it up there on the slides if you want to throw it up there, but for you guys on the left side of the room, turn to chapter 34 and look at verses 5 and 6 with me. Job 34, 5 and 6. Somebody read that for me while I take a drink.
Job has said, I am the right in God. I'm in the right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I am countered and alive. My wound is incurable. No, I am without transgression.
I'm in the right, and God has taken away my right. He accuses God of wrong instead of recognizing his own fallibility or his own capacity to sin and do wrong. He presumes God's character without truly evaluating himself. So I got one more story for you. One more story. I'm going to read this one because I wrote it out. One dark and rainy night, a man had a flat tire on a lonely road. But to his dismay, he had no lug wrench in his trunk. He might have, had a couple bodies in there, but no lug wrench. Seeing a nearby farmhouse, he set out on foot. Surely the farmer will have a lug wrench, he thought. Will he even come to the door? And if he does, he'll probably be furious at being bothered in the middle of the night. He'll say, "What's the big idea? Get me out of bed." This thought made the salesman angry. "Why, that farmer is a selfish old clod to refuse to help me." Finally, the man reached the house. Frustrated and drenched from the rain, he banged on the door. "Who's there?" a voice called out from a window overhead. "You know good and well who it is," yelled the salesman, his face red with anger. "It's me, and you can keep your old lug wrench. I wouldn't borrow it if it was the last one in the county." I think that's funny. Anyway, do you see that he multiplies his words against God? Is that the right passage? I think I had you read the wrong passage. I'm sorry, Nate. It says in it's actually 34. We don't have to go there now. It says that Job multiplied his words against God. This man is multiplying his words against God. He's, one thought leads to the next. You see, like, the progression, like, he'll probably help me. Oh, he probably won't want to be disturbed. Oh, he's a jerk for not helping me. Like, there's like this progression, this snowball going down the hill effect, if you will, where he multiplies his words against the farmer without even, giving the farmer a chance to help him. And Job kind of does the same thing throughout this whole book. He's kind of, accusing God. He's not really waiting for God to answer him. He's kind of assuming, God's intentions through the whole process. So his combination of self-pity and he's got this victimized mentality, and his perception of God's unfairness is what Elihu is getting at, that Job justifies himself rather than God. And furthermore, don't miss this. Furthermore, our priority should never be our own vindication. In other words, we should never be so concerned about proving our own reputation to be right. Our priority should always be the glorification of Jesus Christ. And for that matter, God takes care of the rest, right? So if I'm concerned about glorifying him, even at the expense of my own character in the eyes of other people, the psalm said that he lifts the poor and needy out of the ash heap. And he glorifies, he exalts the humble man, while debasing the proud man. So, when we are so concerned with our own reputation and our own innocence, and we don't, give God the glory for what he's done, we don't let God control the situation, then we are caring far more about the way we look to other people than anything else. So that's Elihu's rebuke to Job. I've kind of condensed it a little bit. It goes for 3 chapters, but those are the main points there. So Elihu rebukes Job. You can go to the next slide. One more. So now we're going to get into Elihu asserting God's justice. So number 1 into this, God cannot be wicked. So look at chapter 34, verses 10 and 12. Got the slide up there if you want to put it up there. Guys, on this side, 34, 10 and 12. Where Elihu says, "Therefore hear me, you men of understanding." In other words, speaking to these men who are supposedly much wiser than he is. "Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to the work of man, he will repay him, and according to his ways, he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly. The Almighty will not pervert justice." God cannot be wicked because wickedness is against his character. This is kind of like, do you know how sometimes you're really, into a TV show for a couple seasons, and then all of a sudden a character starts making decisions that aren't in character with, what he's been doing all this time? I've got a couple amens over here, I think. It's really frustrating, and you're a decision that somebody makes that's out of character, they wouldn't make that decision if that's who they are. And kind of the same way, it's not exactly the same thing. It is out of God's character to act in any wicked way. God cannot do wickedness because he is holy. It is outside of his character. Let's move through these quickly. I've got a couple of these. So next slide. He asserts God's justice. So God cannot be wicked, and no one has the right to question him. Look with me at chapter 34, verse 17. Verse 17. "Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty, who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man, who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. In a moment they die, at midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by the human hand." No one has the right to question him. He is powerful, he is mighty, and life is dependent upon him. The rulers and nobles he describes as worthless and wicked. They don't have the authority to question him. However, God is approachable. We know this from Isaiah, where God speaking says, "Let us reason together." And in Psalm 34, where it says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." It's not that we can't ask questions of God, or we can't come to a personal relationship with him as we know, but no one has the authority to accuse him rather of what he does. That is his right to exercise his will because he is God. So that's number 2. God cannot be wicked. No one has the right to question him. And number 3, nothing is outside his knowledge or sovereignty. So jump down a couple of verses to or next verse 21. "For his eyes are on the ways of a man, He sees all his steps. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. For God has no need to consider a man further that he should go before God in judgment. In other words, God doesn't need to commence an investigation of a man in order to condemn him. He already knows what the man has done. Verse 23, for God has no need to consider a man further that he should go down before God in judgment. So, just as an aside, if God is sovereign, then the fact that Job is suffering falls under his power, under his authority, and under his plan ultimately. So what might seem unfair or evil in this light works together for his perfect plan, which is one of the hang-ups that a lot of people have in our world today with God and with Christianity in general, is that if God is good, why does he allow evil? Why does he allow suffering? Why doesn't he just sweep it all away and make it all right? But the fact is that, as we understand through the Bible, that God does not commission evil, though he might allow it to exist and often uses it to accomplish his plan. I want to read you a passage from Timothy Keller's book, The Reason for God. It's a great book, by the way, where he talks about this issue. So this is Pastor Keller speaking. A woman in my church once confronted me about sermon illustrations in which evil events turned out for the good. She had lost a husband in an act of violence during a robbery. She also had several children with severe mental and emotional problems. She insisted that for every one story in which evil turns out for good, there are 100 in which there is no conceivable silver lining. In other words, no good reason or no good outcome from the suffering. In the same way, much of the discussion so far in this chapter may sound cold and irrelevant to a real-life sufferer. So what if suffering and evil doesn't logically disprove God? Such a person might say, I'm still angry. All this philosophizing does not get the Christian God off the hook for the world's evil and suffering. In response, the philosopher Peter Kreeft points out that the Christian God came to earth to deliberately put himself on the hook of human suffering. In Jesus Christ, God experienced the greatest depths of pain. We're in a couple months, we're going to be approaching Christmas, and we'll probably be talking from Isaiah about, where the passage says that he will be born of a virgin. They'll call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but that name is still applicable to us. God with us. He came and shared in our suffering. It's not just about the fact that he put on flesh. It's that he suffered along with us. He knows the pain that we go through. So, though God allows evil, he uses it to accomplish good. In fact, in chapter 36 of this book, Elihu says that God delivers the afflicted by their affliction. He uses the bad to accomplish the good. So, nothing is outside his knowledge or sovereignty, though what might seem unfair or evil works together for his perfect plan. So next slide. One more. The works of man are subject to his righteous judgment. So chapter 34, verses 24 through 27. I've got that up there too. Can I throw it up there? 24. So he shatters the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Thus, knowing their works, he overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see, because they turned aside from following him and had no regard for any of his ways. The works of man are subject to his righteous judgment. He has the right to punish wrongdoing. And, these people that he's talking about here are not innocent people. In fact, there are no innocent people when it comes to the matter of sin. But God has the right to judge men for their works. It's kind of, our whole legal system is based on the principle that wrong should be punished. So if you or somebody steals a car, you may run for a while, but they're going to hit you. I mean, let's face it, it's really hard to steal something in this day and age where there's cameras everywhere, and all this kind of stuff. Not that you should try it or anything like that. But, you're going to get caught. There's going to be a due process, which means that the law is going to, you're going to be incarcerated, you're going to have to go to jail, you might have to pay a hefty fine, you will have to pay a hefty fine. There's all kinds of consequences for the actions, and in the same way, to a much greater degree, God punishes wickedness. So all the works of men are subject to his righteous judgment. Let's go to the next one, which is the fact that he acts on behalf of the oppressed. Before we look at the passage, there are two sides to justice, right? So one side is the punishment of wicked. Steal a car, go to jail. That's justice. On the other side of that is the caring for the afflicted, the oppressed. God constantly throughout the scriptures associates the worship of himself with caring for the orphans and widows. James 1:27 that says the true religion undefiled before God and the Father is this: visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and keep yourself unspotted from the world. So, the other side of justice is the caring of the oppressed. So let's look at this passage. This is in the same chapter. Let's go down to verse 26. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see, because they turned aside from following him and had no regard for any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, and he heard the cry of the afflicted. So, one aspect of God's justice is that he cares for the afflicted. And so Elihu is encouraging Job in this moment where he's talking about, God hears the cry of the afflicted one. And he goes on to say that, I'm not going to be able to find the verse right off the top of my head. Let me see. So jump over to 36, chapter 36. There's a really good verse in here. No, I can't find it. I'll track that thought down if you guys are interested, and I'll share it with you. Never mind, I can't find the verse. I'm sorry. But he talks about how again redeeming the afflicted through their affliction, and there's a type of cry for help that he acknowledges. It says something to the effect of he doesn't hear the empty cry of someone who doesn't trust him, and I can't forget the word. Sorry. So those are the 5 assertions of God's justice. God cannot be wicked. No one has the right to question him. Nothing is outside his knowledge or sovereignty. The works of man are subject to his righteous judgment, and he acts on behalf of the oppressed. So bring us to the next one here, Nathan. Here's our final section, is that Elihu proclaims God's greatness and majesty. This is 2 chapters, essentially, of him just outpouring glory to God for who he is. So number one under this, God exists independently of us. Look with me at chapter 35, verses 5 through 7. 35, 5 and 7. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? God exists independently of us. Our actions, we may be part of his plan. He may use us, for good, or he may allow us to commit evil in order that his plan can be furthered. But our righteousness, or our goodness, doesn't add anything to him. When we talk about glorifying God with our lives, we're not giving God something he doesn't already possess. We're merely reflecting back to him the glory that he already owns. We're reflecting his character. He gives us the ability to work for his kingdom, certainly, but he exists independently of us. By contrast, all life is dependent on him. He's the sustainer of the universe. He created the universe. He is the one who enables us to be righteous before him. So that's the first thing. God exists independently of us. Number 2, God is beyond comprehension, and therefore so are his acts. Jump over to chapter 36 and look with me at verse 22. It says, "Behold, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has prescribed for him his way, and who can say, you have done wrong? Remember to extol his work, of which men have sung. All mankind has looked on it. Man beholds it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years is unsearchable." We read this earlier during our responsive reading. For he draws up the drops of water. They distill his mist in the rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. Can anyone understand the speaking of the clouds, the thunderings of his pavilion? Behold, he scatters his lightning about him, and covers the roots of the sea. For by these he judges people. He gives food in abundance. He covers his hands with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. Its crashing declares his presence. The cattle also declare that he rises. God is beyond comprehension, and therefore so are his acts. We can't understand the way that he sustains the universe and the way that he keeps the sun rising. The universe operates as as it were a clock. Just the gears within gears within gears, and it's the complexity of it is unfathomable, even though scientists make the best effort to describe it. His works are beyond comprehension, and therefore so are his acts. And our last thing tonight, God redeems man from utter destruction. I love this aspect. So one thing I didn't tell you at the beginning is that Elihu's name means God is Jehovah. So not only in his name, but also in his character and his message the way he acts as messenger between God and Job, he foreshadows Jesus Christ. So let's look at one final passage here. Turn back with me to chapter 33. I'm going to look at verse 19. This is perhaps my favorite section of this entire book. Chapter 33, verse 19. Elihu says, "Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed, and with continual strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread, his appetite the choicest food." It gets better, I promise. "His flesh is so wasted away that he cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. His soul draws near to the pit, and his life to those who bring death. If there be for him an angel," now recognize some of these words, "a mediator, one of 1,000 to declare to him what is right for him, and he is merciful to him, it says, deliver him from going down into the pit. I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. The man prays to God, and he accepts him. He sees his face with a shout of joy, and he that is God restores to man his righteousness. And man sings before men and says, I sinned and perverted what was wrong, but it was not repaid to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down into the pit, and my life shall look upon the light. Behold, God does all these things." Elihu ultimately foreshadows the coming of the Messiah, and that is why I love this passage. He talks about the mediator. He's not, specifically saying that the person of Christ will come, but he is saying that God is capable of redeeming someone who is fallen. Like the person says, I sinned and perverted what was right, but it was not repaid to me. God is capable of restoring broken relationships. And that's like, salvation 101 right in there, right? Confess sin, beseech God for help, have faith in him, and relationship is restored. So I think that is what is so beautiful about Elihu's inclusion in the book, is that he acts as the messenger between God and Job. He acts as a Christ-like figure to share this message of redemption with Job, and to encourage him that you're not lost. Hope is not lost. You can still come out of this, and ultimately we'll see what happens next week. So why don't you guys bow your heads? I don't know where you guys are. We spent some time in confession earlier. I don't know if there's something on your hearts that you've been struggling with. Just understand that there's no suffering that is too great for God's concern, or too small for God's concern. We know how severely Job was afflicted, lost his whole family. Whatever you're going through right now, whether it's great or small, I want you to just take a minute and give that to the Lord. Know that he does care. He does hear the cries of the afflicted, and often, as the word says, he uses the affliction to rescue the afflicted. Just take a minute and give whatever that thing is to the Lord.